Stephen Stryker was 74 years old, and he wanted to live. His family knew it. His doctors knew it. He had told them so. But the person who legally controlled every medical decision in his life was not his family and not his doctor. It was a stranger the court had appointed to protect him. And on a single piece of hospital paperwork, that stranger had already written the words that would end his life. Do not resuscitate. When his heart stopped, 4 days later, no one in the room was allowed to save him. That is what the fine print said. This is not a story about a doctor or a hospital or a diagnosis gone wrong. It is a story about a job most people have never heard of and never think about until it is too late to think about it: the professional guardian. When an elderly or disabled person is declared unable to care for themselves, a court can hand a stranger total control over their money, over their home, over their medicine, and over the single most important decision a human being can face: the decision between life and death. The woman at the center of this story controlled more than 400 of them. And when investigators finally walked into her office, they found something that made the entire system stop and stare. This is how one signature on a piece of paperwork nobody had approved was allowed to decide who lived and who died. Her name was Rebecca Fierle. In court records, she also appears as Rebecca Fierle Santoyan. For years, she was one of the most powerful professional guardians in the state of Florida, running a for-profit operation out of the Orlando and Ocala area in the center of the state. At her peak, she controlled the assets and the medical decisions of more than 400 elderly and disabled Floridians, spread across more than a dozen counties. It was one of the largest guardianship operations in the entire state. Judges signed off on her. Hospitals worked with her. On paper, she was exactly the kind of person the system was built to trust. But understand what a guardian really is. A guardian does not just pay your bills and manage your bank account. A guardian can decide whether you receive treatment. A guardian can decide whether a do-not-resuscitate order goes into your file. And once that order is in the file, it does not argue. It does not hesitate. It simply waits. That is where the story of Stephen Stryker begins. Stephen Stryker was 74, from Brevard County on Florida's Atlantic coast. In September of 2018, the court placed him under Rebecca Fierle's guardianship. From that moment, she, and not his family, spoke for him in the hospital. She held the pen. By May of 2019, Stryker was a patient at St. Joseph's Hospital in Tampa. And there, according to the record, Fierle made two decisions. On May 9th, she ordered his doctors to cap his feeding tube, and she had placed a do-not-resuscitate order on him, reportedly against the family's wishes, against medical advice, and against the wishes of Stephen Stryker himself, who wanted to keep living. Think about that combination for a moment. The tube that was feeding him closed off, and an order, already in his chart, that said if his body failed, no one was to bring him back. On May 13th, Stephen Stryker choked, he aspirated, and he went into cardiac arrest. And because of the do-not-resuscitate order sitting in his file, the staff did not resuscitate him. He died. He was 74 years old, and the paperwork had decided, days in advance, that he would not be saved. His death forced the courts to ask a question they should have asked years earlier. How many other do-not-resuscitate orders had Rebecca Fierle signed? The answer was chilling. On July 3, 2019, a judge removed her from her cases. The finding was that she had filed do-not-resuscitate orders on her wards without permission from their families and without permission from the court. The records quote her own words. She said she files DNRs for wards regularly. Regularly. Not once. Not as a last resort in a hopeless case. As a routine. As part of the process. A single judge removed her from 98 cases. She resigned from roughly 40 more. Overnight, more than 100 vulnerable people learned that the stranger legally controlling whether they lived or died had been making that exact call, alone, with a signature. And then investigators went to her office. In 2019, agents from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement searched Rebecca Fierle's Orlando office. What they found inside is the detail that no one who covered this case has ever been able to forget. They found the cremated remains of 9 people and 1 dog. 9 human beings who had been in her care, reduced to boxes on a shelf, unclaimed, in the office of the woman the courts had trusted to protect them. But the office held a second kind of evidence too, because behind the guardianship there was money, a great deal of it. The numbers came from an official source, the report of the Orange County Comptroller, report number 479, and they told a story of their own. The hospital chain Advent Health had paid Rebecca Fierle nearly $4 million, $3,956,325 over about 10 years. But here's the problem. Of the 682 patients she billed for, only 210 were actually court-supervised wards. The court's fee cap was $65 an hour. The hospital was paying her roughly double that, about $130. Investigators documented double billing, charging the hospital and the court for the very same work. And 900 invoices, more than $500,000, were never disclosed to the court at all. Sit with the conflict of interest hidden in those numbers. A hospital wants beds filled and bills paid. A guardian decides what happens to the patient in the bed, and here was a hospital paying the guardian directly, far above the legal rate for the very people whose fate she controlled. A guardian is supposed to serve the person. The paperwork suggested she was serving the invoice. In February of 2020, it caught up with her. Agents from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement arrested Rebecca Fierle. The state's Attorney General, Ashley Moody, announced the charges: 2 felonies, aggravated abuse of an elderly person and neglect of an elderly person, tied directly to the death of Stephen Stryker. Then the case took a turn that few people expected. In September of 2022, her trial ended in a mistrial, the jury deadlocked, unable to agree on a verdict. In February of 2023, rather than face a second trial, she pleaded no contest to a single felony neglect charge. And on July 21st, 2023, she was sentenced. 4 years of probation, 100 hours of community service, a permanent ban from ever again working as a guardian or with the elderly or with the disabled, no jail time. For the man who died because his file said "Do not resuscitate," that was the sentence. There is one part of this story that did change. In June of 2020, the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, signed a guardianship reform into law. Under the new rules, a guardian can no longer sign a "Do not resuscitate" order on their own. It now requires the approval of a court, and guardians are now required to disclose every single payment they receive. The exact door that let one woman decide alone whether more than 400 people lived or died, that door was closed. Too late for Stephen Stryker, but closed. So here is the question this story leaves on the table. Stephen Stryker did everything a person is supposed to do. He was in a hospital, he had a legal guardian, the system was on paper protecting him, and it was the paper that killed him. If the people appointed to protect the most vulnerable among us can decide who lives and who dies with a single signature, then the only thing standing between a human being and that signature is whether anyone, is reading what gets signed. We read the fine print so you don't have to. This is the fine print.